against the people of Ukraine. The reason he did this is because of his imperial ambitions to reincorporate Ukraine into the greater Russian Empire in his mind, but also because he perceived weakness and opportunity from the West and, regrettably, from President Biden. We saw last night the president congratulate himself on the diplomatic coalition he's put together to confront Vladimir Putin. That's akin to Neville Chamberlain celebrating the coalition he assembled against Germany after Germany invaded Poland. The whole point was to deter Vladimir Putin. That failed. Why did it fail? Because for the last year, the president has projected weakness and signaled to Vladimir Putin that he didn't have the nerve to counteract his ambitions. His first action in office was to give Vladimir Putin his #1 foreign policy priority, a no-strings-attached extension of a one-sided nuclear arms control treaty. Shortly after that, he gave Vladimir Putin his second foreign policy priority, again with no strings attached. He waived sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. We didn't really take stern measures for the Colonial pipeline hack from Russian-affiliated hackers. We rewarded Vladimir Putin with a high-stakes summit last summer. But it's not just foreign policy, it's also domestic policy here at home. As day follows night, Vladimir Putin gets emboldened and more aggressive when the price of oil is higher. And for the last year, the Biden administration has done everything they can to stifle the production of American oil and gas that would not only keep the price of gasoline lower for our citizens, keep the price of heating their home lower, it would also constrain Vladimir Putin by reducing the revenues he has for his war machine. But the Biden administration's war on oil and gas has in fact emboldened him. So much so that we are to this day still importing hundreds of thousands of barrels of Russian oil and petroleum products every day. Since Vladimir Putin launched this naked war of aggression last week, we have filled his coffers with millions and millions of American dollars to fund his aggression against the Ukrainian people. We still haven't taken the steps necessary to stop this. Sanctions on Russian oil and gas, to cut off those revenues, to bankrupt Vladimir Putin's war machine, but also to continue the pressure that those sanctions would impose to begin to once again pump more oil and gas here at home. If we really wanted to add the pressure to Vladimir Putin that oil and gas sanctions would put on him, we would unleash a flood of American oil and gas into the market and deprive Vladimir Putin of those revenues. But instead, on the very day, literally the very day last week, when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, President Biden halted all new oil and gas leases on federal lands. Think about that. A ruthless dictator invades an innocent nation of 45 million souls, using oil and gas as a weapon against the West, who could come to the aid of that nation. And President Biden's action on that day was to halt all new oil and gas leases on federal lands. To the extent the president even talked about energy in his speech last night, he simply made pipe dream promises about green energy that maybe will come true in a decade or two, but will do nothing at the moment to deter Vladimir Putin, and in fact will continue to embolden him by highlighting the lack of seriousness to confront and undermine his aggression. In fact, the president only mentioned oil once last night in that entire speech, when he bragged about releasing 30 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which wouldn't fuel our country for even 2 days. What we need is not half measures. We need a sustained, reliable, and affordable flow of American energy. That's why I'm here to ask for unanimous consent for my bill ordering the Biden administration to start issuing new oil and gas leases for federal lands. It won't solve all of our problems, but it's an important and immediate step that we can take to start producing the American oil and gas that will undercut Vladimir Putin's war machine. President Biden's foolish energy policy couldn't have come at a worse time for Ukraine, but we can begin to end it right now by putting our American oil and gas workers back to work. I urge my colleagues to stand with Ukraine and to support the bill. It's really a choice between American energy or Russian energy. We can decide. And therefore, I ask for unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S 3731, which is at the desk. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving my right to object.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I reserve the right to object and to explain why to my colleagues here in the Senate. This is an unfortunate, terrible exploitation of a crisis in Russia by the oil and natural gas industry of the United States of America. They have no shame. They have no conscience. They have no sense of decency. This industry, this unscrupulous industry, led by the American Petroleum Institute, really the American Prevarication Institute, which is what we're hearing here today, and what we've heard on the airways with millions, tens of millions of dollars of television ads saying that we've just got to drill, baby, drill here in the United States. That's the answer to the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians. Well, a few facts might be helpful so the American people can understand once again that all the American Petroleum Institute is about is tipping consumers upside down at the pump and shaking money out of their pockets. That's who they are. So, just for a few facts here, the oil industry in the United States has bid for leases on American public lands. Right now, 53% of the leases which the oil industry, the natural gas industry of the United States have onshore in our country, in our forests, in our fields, they're not drilling on them. 53% of all the leases that they have from the American people. Have they been drilling to protect us against this day? No, they have not. Now, how about offshore? Well, offshore, the oil industry is not using 77% of all of their existing leases off our shores right now. And what do? They come in here with crocodile tears. If only you'd give us more leases. If only you'd take more of the American people's land and give it to us, then we'll drill. Well, this is just hypocrisy on stilts. This is just, again, the American Petroleum Institute engaging in exploitative, profit-making actions. And the Republican Party, sadly, is cooperating with them in this time of crisis for the short-term benefit of the American Petroleum Institute, which should hang its head in shame about this debate that we're having right now, when 77% of all the leases offshore, they haven't drilled yet. 53% of all the leases onshore, they haven't drilled yet. And by the way, that area, you want to know how big it is? It's just slightly smaller than the state of Arkansas. In other words, they've got almost an Arkansas of public lands that they already own, they're already leasing from the American public, and they're not drilling on it. That would be every square inch of Arkansas. They're not drilling. What they do is they bid low for the leases, they keep them, they wait for the day when the price goes high, then they start drilling. They just hoard them. And they're looking for this as another opportunity to hoard more. To hoard more. Now, the President has responded by deploying the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in the short term. There are 600,000 barrels of oil a day that come into the United States. Thank God our Strategic Petroleum Reserve has 6 600 million barrels. In other words, you could deploy 600,000 barrels a day, every day, for 1,000 days out of our Strategic Petroleum Reserve to make up for the Russian oil. Okay? We could do that right now. But one thing that we should never do is just get stampeded by this oil and gas industry greed, this industry that has blocked our movement to all-electric vehicles, blocked our movement to wind and solar, blocked our ability to blunt the need to have oil for our vehicles, natural gas for our homes, because it's inconsistent with their business interests, their profit-making. They should just be ashamed of what they're doing here today. Ashamed. And the Republican Party should have no part of it. GOP should not stand for gas and oil party. That's what we're hearing here today. That's what I'm listening to. And if we're going to respond, let's respond together as a nation. Let's not break this down into partisan politics, special interest politics in our country. Let's come together as a nation. Let's work to ensure that we are protecting ourselves, that we are protecting consumers. And if the American Petroleum Institute wants to be part of this, there's nothing stopping them from bringing out 2,000 or 3,000 rigs this week, starting to drill on an area the size of Arkansas, waiting for them so the oil can start pumping, not waiting to go through a whole leasing process, bidding process. They can do it right now. And you know what's going to happen? They're just going to sit there because they're making a bundle. They're tipping people upside down. They're exploiting this. Okay? And by the way, let's not understate the partnership which American companies, some key oil companies, have with the Russians. That's real too, right now. Let's just not forget the whole history of this. How do we get here? How do we get bad foreign policy? How do we get bad national policy? How do we get bad oil and gas policy? How do we get it? Well, ultimately, behind the curtain, in almost every instance, you find an oil and gas interest somewhere in the world. And we're hearing it here today. We're hearing it today. They want to drill off the coast of Florida. They want to drill off the coast of Maine. Or at a minimum, they want the leases, so they'll be ready someday to be able to do it. Huh? That's their goal. And meanwhile, they just sit on their hands, not drilling on an area the size of Arkansas, because they know the less they do that is the more that we can create a panic in our country with false answers. Answers that may work on Fox, but it doesn't work in reality. It just doesn't work. It's just wrong, plain wrong, to be using this as an issue right now for the benefit of the American Prevarication Institute. And behind this whole curtain of dark money in our country looms the largest voice, which is the oil and gas industry of our country. So we got a chance here. We got a chance to respond in the short run with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, getting our allies to produce more oil, asking our own American companies to produce more oil, and then passing out here on the floor the tax breaks for all electric vehicles. And I'll give you a little number. If we just deploy 15 million all-electric vehicles, we back out all the oil from Russia. Just 15 million all-electric vehicles. The next 15 million backs out all of the Saudi oil. The next 15 million backs out all the oil from the Middle East. You want to do something? You want to terrify them? You want to destroy their business model in Russia or the Middle East? That's what you should be doing. But no, what we hear from the Republicans is, we're not going to support any of that agenda. No money for wind, no money for solar, no money for all-electric vehicles, no money for new battery storage technologies. No, 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 no. To the long-term solution for the next generation of Americans, young people, pages here in the well, who want to know what's the plan for the long term. So that's the sad fact of what's happening here today on the floor. So from my perspective, we don't need to be throwing good land and waters at bad actors in our society. It's wrong. We shouldn't do it. And as a result, I object to the motion of the senator from Arkansas.
The objection is heard.
I yield the floor.